All right. Okay, I see two folks in the participants, and here they come. More folks are starting to come in. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm going to get the chat going over here.
Yeah, thank you, Gare. Just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started, and I'll probably repeat myself as I see more people piling in. But my name is Nick Houle. I'll be kind of administering this conversation between Gary Schoeniger and Thom Ruhe today. I'll also be managing the chat. If there's enough questions that warrant, kind of sorting through, I'll read those out to the panelists. You can also feel free to throw those questions in the Q&A section as well, and we'll get to you whenever we do. As you probably heard when you joined in, this is being recorded, and we will be sending that recording out within 24 hours or so of the end of this. And yeah, I think that covers everything necessary.
I just put in the chat, Nick. I'm just asking everyone who's joining, please just go in the chat, say hello, let us know who you are, where you're from, maybe, or your organization you're working with or whatever. Just, it helps us a little bit kind of hone in on the audience. So that would be helpful. We'll just wait a minute, let folks kind of get
a couple more coming in. I see Rosanna Mulcahy from Asheville. That's nice to see a familiar name on the list. That's
nice.
Great.
There they go. Morrisville, North Carolina. Hi, Glenna.
Yeah, Glenna Gonzalez.
Texas,
great.
Toledo. OC Irons, Detroit. Hey, OC, great to see you. Leslie Stone, West Virginia. Asheville. Somebody from Asheville. I'm going to Asheville tomorrow. This is Irene. Yeah, I'm heading to Asheville tomorrow, Irene. That's interesting. Northern California, Gay Larson. Oh, yeah. Danelle from Tarrant County, Fort Worth. Excellent. Glenna Gonzalez, Morrisville, North Carolina, Roanoke, Virginia. Hope Cupid. Hi, Hope. Great to have you here.
Hi, Hope.
Good. Red Oak, Texas. Dr. George Taylor from Minnesota. Welcome. Ernie Mahaffey. Hey, Ernie. We've got some catching up to do. Yeah.
It's nice to see some old friends, some names I recognize.
Yep. Welcome, Jolinda from Liberty EDC in Liberty, Missouri. President of Ethan King. Welcome from Salem, North Carolina. And there's Michael Shields from Ireland. All right, Michael, welcome.
So let's see, what is it, about
7 o'clock?
7 p.m.?
7 p.m. I think, and Michael's landing in. I think Michael's in Dublin.
He's in Cork, I believe.
In Cork, okay.
Yeah.
7 p.m. I hope he's holding a pint.
Yeah.
By the way, we're much more entertaining the more pints you've had.
Yeah.
Very true.
The more you drink, the smarter I get.
Yeah. So Nick, I think we're ready to get started.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a couple minutes past. I don't want to hold up the show. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We are the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset, education, training, and professional development. We serve academic institutions, organizations, and communities around the world. And today we're going to be talking with Thom Ruhe, who is the CEO and president of NC IDEA. And he's doing some really interesting things with entrepreneurship as a means of economic development. But I want to give you the quick backstory. I met Thom about 11 or 12 years ago now, when Thom was the vice president of entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation. Thom became our champion at Kauffman. For those of you who are familiar with the Ice House program, Thom was our champion that brought the Ice House program to Kauffman, helped with the initial development and funding for the program, helped us bring the Ice House program to life. So that's just the backstory. That's how I met Thom. And the one thing I'll say is that, I meet a lot of people in the entrepreneurship education game, and I think Thom is one of the few people I've met that really understands the broader impact that an entrepreneurial experience can have on an individual. So Thom, welcome. I want to start by asking you, like, what set you, how did you make that connection between entrepreneurship and economic development? Like, what set you on that path?
Thanks, Gary. And hi to all our old friends, past and present. Like you said in the intro, you and I have spent a little over a decade together on a certain shared quest, but we had lots of friends along the way. So it's nice to see some of them in the chat box there. So I think, Gary, like most people, we're at a certain age, they find themselves in life. They're there because of just a collection of experiences and conclusions that they've made along the way. For me, my life professionally is probably best defined in two time blocks. And roughly the first 2 decades of my life, post-college, was really bouncing between startups, high growth firms, getting my lumps and getting my entrepreneurship card punched, but just experiencing firsthand in a very real, visceral, dirt under the fingernail way, how entrepreneurship, creates wealth, how entrepreneurs solve problems, how starting companies, sustain communities, right? And I just intuitively, I experienced that. I never set out like most entrepreneurs and say, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur today. I just kind of fell into it. And then right around the time I hit 40 years old, we sold the last company I was part of. And when those moments happen, you have the benefit of taking a moment to reflect. And there was this economic development entity coming together in Northeast Ohio called Jumpstart, which is ironically very similar to NC Idea and what I'm doing here today. And it, got me an opportunity to just kind of jump over, instead of just going off and doing my next entrepreneurial thing, it really was this moment to reflect and say, I wonder if I could help other people do the same, right? When you get to this point, you feel like you've accomplished a little bit of something. It's given you the ability to take a breath and to look around and kind of peruse what options you might have. And I just fell in love with this idea that, we could do more, for the economy. We can help more people. We could build stronger, more equitable communities through entrepreneurship, right? And focusing on entrepreneurship. And again, the 20 years that led up to that were my personal proof of that. And then, fell in with this great founding team at Jumpstart that all had similar backgrounds, all had come from recent, successes, and came together and said, what if we did this kind of economic development activity like a startup, right? Let's eat our own dog food and let's practice what we preach. And so we went off and did that. And, for anybody that knows the Jumpstart story in Northeast Ohio, the economic impact and benefit to the state of Ohio and the community speaks for itself. It's measured in billions of dollars now, 17 years later. And, the work we did there garnered the attention of, the world's largest foundation that pays attention to entrepreneurship, namely the Kauffman Foundation. Candidly, Kauffman would have been the only thing I would have left my job at Jumpstart for, but it's kind of, if you'll excuse the sports vernacular, because I know you and I are big sports guys, but it's like getting called up to the major leagues, right? And so I got to go there, and in the 7 years I was there, really had the opportunity to see at a very large scale and a global scale, right? And this kind of conclusion is something you and I have talked about over the years, and that is that, entrepreneurship is a universal thing, right? That it's not uniquely the phenomenon of the United States, but it's something that can empower anybody, anywhere to overcome circumstances and survive. And so the 7 years I spent there, I really got to see on a grand scale how it really is an underappreciated economic development engine, because it is. I mean, when you think about, big stories, right? Here I almost said Northeast Ohio, here in North Carolina, in the Triangle, right? Of the last 2 months, 2 very big announcements were made. Google is going to put 1,000 engineers right here, candidly, a couple blocks from that building you can see in the back of my window here. And then Apple is going to drop 3,000 people over in the Research Triangle Park. And, generally speaking, that's great news. And that's economic development, right? We killed the big white buffalo, or in old fashioned terms, it's called smokestack chasing. In the case of Apple, it only took almost $1 billion of incentives to get them to say yes to that. What I like to point out, though, is in 2020, despite all the hardship that everybody suffered through with COVID, in North Carolina, we had a record number of new high propensity firm filings. And these are new companies that Commerce and Census segment off as saying, based upon things they say at their filings, they're going to have the likelihood to generate jobs. And the increase over 2019 was about 7,000 more, right? An all-time high, about 44,000. So let's just say if we take the 2019 number as a baseline and say in 2020 we had 7,000 more, what would you guess the average number of jobs created by a company in North Carolina in its first year of existence? It's about 5, just shy of, according to data from Kauffman, like 4.8, 4.89 or something to that effect. So let's call it 5, so the math is easy.
Yeah.
So what are 5 jobs times 7,000? That's 35,000 jobs.
Yep.
Right? That's the immediate potential right out of just what happened organically in 2020. We now have an opportunity to have 35,000 more jobs than the annual baseline of new jobs that entrepreneurs create every day without fanfare, without incentives, without acknowledgement, right? What would any community in this country be willing to offer in the form of incentives if some big company came in and said, we'll promise to create 35,000 jobs? How many billions of dollars in incentives do you think they'd get for that?
Well, Thom, this is so interesting and to me. And you lay this data down, it seems so obvious. Why aren't we doing more in public education to encourage this? I mean, do you, what you're saying is like, but yet it seems to me so obvious that our systems of education are still systematically creating people who are destined to become employees.
Yeah. That's the machine, right? And I loved it because you and Tony Wagner had this conversation in this series a couple months back.
Yep.
And obviously this has been in part of the lexicon that you all have been promoting, is that, the education system today, and this is not new, it's been broken for decades, is just still based upon the old industrial revolution, inadequate thinking. Right, that you just have to be good drones, right?
Yeah.
And take your place in the line, right? That's going to churn stuff out. That's gonna break. It's already breaking. There was just a great story in Times or the Post put out this week about Amazon and their turnover rate at about 150% annually.
Yeah,
they're going to run out of people if they don't figure out a way to be better employers. Right? There's just not going to be that much in the labor force that's going to sustain 150% turnover.
Yeah.
But more importantly, if we can, and if we catch them early, as you and I have said before, which is why we're, always very excited when we see an Ice House offering going into like middle school or high school. If you catch them early, it's a life empowerment, opportunity.
Right.
And to me, that should be the crux of education, is that, we're empowering students to face a world that's different than the world we even grew up in.
Right.
The pace of change is happening so fast that if we want people to be relevant and socially engaged and economically safe, we can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect a different result.
Well, that's the interesting thing, Thom. I mean, I think I kind of cut you off, and you're on a roll there, but you're doing a great job of painting a picture of entrepreneurship as this economic engine, right? And so, the question I wanted to ask you is, it seems to me that there's still sort of this lingering default assumption that entrepreneurs are born. That you know, occasionally somebody comes along, like a Zuckerberg comes along, they're genetically predisposed to behave that way, and we just have to find the Zuckerbergs, and they'll create these companies that'll create, you know, all these jobs. And I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Let's see, I got to use a technical term, horse hockey.
Right.
I mean,
people are still asking that question. Are they made or born? Yeah.
They are. And I try to come up with new and creative ways to be dismissive about it, because I think it's silly anymore, and it shouldn't even linger, right? Everybody, and I do mean everybody, has the same potential, you know, to contribute to humanity, to be part of a strong and vibrant society. You know, it's in our base DNA.
I think so.
What's unfortunate is that that's where the equality stops, is at the DNA level. And then literally from the moment they're born, and in some cases even before they're born, based upon whether or not the mother had access to prenatal care and, right? We don't have equity in the access to the resources, the networks, the capital, the training, the mentoring that lets us see that potential.
Yeah.
So we have a sampling error, right? Because certain, shall we say, male white populations are overrepresented.
Yep.
You know, people that just glom on for easy answers want to look at that and say, well, see, those people then had to be born that way because there's a common heuristic that I'm observing.
Right.
And what they don't recognize is that the sample set is tainted.
Right.
And if you were to go back and try to correct for some, you know, systemic issues and racism and things like that, and equal, you know, kind of try to level the playing field, you would see that, you know, a much broader sampling in success, right? And the benefits that cascade from that.
Well, you know, you reminded me of something Clifton Talbert told me when I first met him. And he said, you know, long before this word entrepreneur became popular, the concept still existed. I mean, people have been surviving this way and thriving for, you know, a long time.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Right. We just didn't call it that.
Right.
And those are the people. And let's just take this second too to point something out. It doesn't always mean also that hero figure or that lone wolf that goes off and starts a company, right? There are entrepreneurs working within very large corporations, right? Or family businesses. And again, they'll never self-identify as that with that word entrepreneur, but they see the world differently, right? They observe. They have that, you know, as we've talked about many times, that external locus of control. So for me, you know, it's unfortunate because the word entrepreneur or entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial, it has what I call a lot of positive brand confusion.
Yeah.
It's generally considered in positive terms, mostly. There are times in certain environments where it's actually got a little bit of a caustic reputation, but mostly people consider it in positive terms, but varies, right? From Zuckerberg, you know, to the husband and wife that own a filling station on the corner of your neighborhood, you know, and every slice in between. And that's okay. But when I say entrepreneurial mindset, you know, I'm really talking about a life skill.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to kind of what we're talking about today, and that's education and why, you know, entrepreneurial thinking, call it, if you don't like the word entrepreneurial mindset or the expression entrepreneurial mindset, come up with something else, but it's really about empowerment, right? And it's helping people with agency, and it's giving them certain tools that will serve them well in life. And as they serve themselves well in life, they serve their communities and they strengthen their communities.
Thom, where's the break in the link? I mean, you did such a good job of articulating. Like, let's not even get into the developmental benefits of the individual. You did we'll get into that in a minute, but you did a very good job of articulating the economic impact of entrepreneurship. The average startup creates around 5 jobs in the first year. I mean, so just set aside the developmental benefits for the individual, the resilience, the resourcefulness, the creative, critical thinking, all those things that come with it. Just put that aside for a second. Where's the disconnect? I mean, I'm going to give you plenty of time to talk about what you're doing in North Carolina and the impact that you're making with entrepreneurship, but where's the disconnect?
I think it's complicated, like most, big things are. The disconnect is in representation, for one, right? Because the people that are entrepreneurial and are specifically endeavoring on new firms, they don't have the time, and they rarely, if ever, have the resources to go out and proactively look for advocacy, right?
Right.
So they're elected officials, they're invisible.
Right.
There's no voice for them because they're just busy out there building the companies that are creating the jobs that some politician is going to take credit for later.
Right. And they're not making headlines. They're not, doing IPOs. They're not flashy. They're not driving Lamborghinis. They're not visible. And so to your point, there's like a visibility versus representation issue.
Thank you. That is exactly what I was trying to say, but I forgot the term. But that is the situation, right? So that's one phase of it. Part of the other complication is, our collective attention spans and election cycles. Entrepreneurship goes on its own schedule, right? Or as we like to say, kind of tongue in cheek, right? Oh, well, I'll give you an example. A really great company here in Durham, as a matter of fact, just was acquired by Shutterfly for $225 million. That overnight success was 12, 13 years in the making. Right. So they're just grinding it out. And the founders, there were a couple guys that, came together. One of the wives had a need that was unfilled in the marketplace. And they just said, how hard can that be, to fill that need? And, they saw this problem and said, maybe there's an opportunity here. But that process is messy and it's hard and it requires attention and focus and diligence and work. So who's standing up for that and saying, yeah, how can I help? Let me have more of that. And, where do I get to insert here, to take credit for something? And I think that's part of the challenge, right? The upside, though, is as communities figure that out more and more, and as communities understand that entrepreneurship is probably one of the most leveraged tools you can use for true economic development, at some point you get to a virtuous cycle, a tipping point, and it starts becoming self-sustaining. But it takes a while of patience. It takes qualified people, adequately resourced, patiently working very hard and holding themselves accountable to outcomes and impact. It's not sexy. I wish I had this. All right, everybody, just for the viewers today, let me give you the silver bullet, right?
The secret sauce, right?
The secret sauce. And the secret is there is no secret. It's hard work.
But I think there is a little bit, if there is a secret sauce, Thom, and I think we're not doing enough of this, it's to, you need relatable social models. And so in order to get people to behave in whatever way you want to get them to behave, they need to see people that they can relate to succeeding in that domain. And so we're not doing enough to elevate the trials and the triumphs of this little guy. The startup, the unlikely entrepreneurs that are in every community, everywhere. They're doing it. They're creating 5 jobs or 10 jobs or whatever they're doing, but they're contributing to the community. They're creating wealth. They're creating jobs. That's an untold story that needs to be told. And I think
again, people generally like that story, right? And they'll be like, "Oh, I'm all for it," but it's about as meaningful as, and I don't mean to cast aspersions to anybody, but it's almost as meaningful as, people that will just so easily toss off to a veteran, thank you for your service. And it's like, okay, did you maybe send him a care package when he was, overseas and serving, right? Like, it's easy to say thank you for whatever, as long as I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the similar, world that entrepreneurs labor in. And, if you have the ability to look back and take time, and that's where organizations like ours can help, First of all, we can help them in that early stage, right, when they need it. Case in point, again, back to Spoonflower, one of the founders, said at the time they got a $50,000 grant from us is when, every nickel was like $20.
Yeah.
Right? And it was at a critical inflection point. And then the validation that comes with that. And so that we can help people pay more attention and see the benefit of doing this. But, that's a long view, man. And I'm still struggling with it. I've been doing it for 15 years now. And, I still am trying to figure out, what's kind of the magic quadrant where we can help do more of it. But I also know the benefit, forgive me, Gary, I think I've told you this story, but like one of my last companies, right? That one of the things I enjoyed most about that experience was, I'd go out and do a sales call because the founder usually is, the salesperson. I'd come back and our office lease had a dedicated parking lot. It was in a very bad neighborhood of Cleveland. So we had to have a kind of a barbed wire parking lot. So it was just our employees that would park there. And whenever I'd come back from a call, I'd sit for a moment in the parking lot and I'd count the cars because each car belonged to one of our employees. And I knew that each car represented, income to a family that was likely paying for a mortgage or rent, was making car payments, putting food on the table, right? And as that parking lot became more and more full over time, I started visualizing this impact. Maybe it's a silly little metaphor, but to me, it meant something. I looked at it and went, collectively, we're helping now 45 mortgages to be made.
Right.
Kids going to school and having violin lessons and being able to play sports and, everything that goes with that.
Yep.
That's the essence of the community impact that entrepreneurship has.
Right.
But for these partners that, we came together to start that company, that doesn't happen.
Right.
Right. Not to say nothing of the resiliency that it does for an economy, right? That it's not like all the eggs are in one big basket.
I don't want to get too far off in the weeds here, Tom, but I just take us aside for a minute. I think people often overlook the fact that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own efforts is a very powerful motivational force, and it's in all of us. And that we just don't really pay attention to that. Most of us don't get to do that. So when you're sitting in the parking lot and you're seeing the number of cars growing, that's a visual representation of the impact you are having. People want to make impact. They don't want to just go to a job and collect a paycheck. I mean, that's part of it. And I, again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds of the entrepreneurial mindset so much, but I want you to, I feel like I derailed your momentum in the beginning, and I'll give you a chance to talk about, like, what are you doing at NC Idea? How did you take your experience from Jumpstart, your experience at Kauffman, and how did you mesh that together in your role as the CEO and president of NC Idea?
So basically, it started with this, and sorry, it is a little bit in the weeds, but it started with kind of the conditions under which I agreed to take the role. So fortunately, the board that hired me, before I accepted the role, I had a chance to have a dialogue with them, and to their credit, they were very open to that dialogue. And what I had said was basically, I wasn't interested in the job unless a couple of conditions were met. Namely, we're going to focus statewide, because historically it had been primarily to the benefit of the Triangle and a little bit to Charlotte. And there's reasons for that, and it's fine. That wasn't something that was wrong, but I just wanted to commit to the hard work of credibly trying to be, a greater resource to a broader pool. And that kind of flows into the second big condition, and that is that we had to have a focus on really engaging underserved populations, which we define as, minority founders, specifically Black and Hispanic, in the state of North Carolina, female, and rural, because these are the communities that you can have great ecosystems, like the Triangle, which is the, Durham, Raleigh area, basically Wake, Orange, and Durham County. it's one of the, in my humble estimation, after doing 7 years at Kauffman with this, it's probably one of the top 10 ecosystems in the country. And that's great. But if you have, a quarter of your population, still living in the state with, extreme, economic distress per the Economic Innovation Group's Distress Communities Index, I mean, they might as well be in a different state.
Right.
We have, I was going to say almost past tense, we haven't cured this yet. But there are states that border each other that, the majority of the population is living in absolute prosperity. And then the adjacent neighborhood is actually in the bottom, quintile, where the majority of the population is living with extreme economic distress. To me, that just, this might sound quaint, but that just is unfair. It's just bad. It's all around bad. And I couldn't have taken the role and just kept doing that, knowing that these problems existed and did nothing for it, especially when I know this thing called entrepreneurship could empower these people in these underserved communities. So the board, to their credit, said, yes, please, that's what we want to do. And, why don't you come and help lead that? So we did. And so from day one, we challenged ourselves to say, okay, what's a strategy? Theory of change, the purists would say, although I'm not quite that intelligent to use such language. All I said is, like, what are we going to do differently, right? What's the portfolio that we have to build? And the first thing that, I recognized is we had to, do some, again, eating our own dog food, like do some customer discovery, understand what's needed by the various populations we seek to serve. And so that took a good year of exploration, being out in the field, getting in the car, up until COVID, I was doing about 40,000 miles a year on my car, which was always fun when I took it in for service. Like, what's going on here? But that's what it takes. And so that you realize, Eastern North Carolina, for example, rural community, right? The challenges and things that they're trying to overcome there are different than Western North Carolina rural, right? People that don't get engaged just think rural's rural, and female founders, we can put a little portfolio together for that. And Black founders and Hispanic founders, we'll just whatever. It's not that simple. So we had to figure out a portfolio of grants and programs that would be deployable throughout the state, and where they're deployable in a way that was germane and relevant to the needs of the people right there immediately. Oh, and by the way, I should mention the fact that they were willing to let us be both a grant-making foundation and a program foundation. So that's unusual. Most foundations either stroke checks or they run programs.
Right.
We do both, and I like to think we're smarter in both based upon what we learn on the other. So our programs that we manage, like our labs program, which is a very intensive accelerator program, that's very similar and common to 1,000 other programs across the country. But what we learn in that kind of makes us better grant makers, for example. So we've put together this portfolio, and then I think the biggest secret sauce is we put together just a dream team of partner organizations, volunteer reviewers, just what I would call collectively the friends of the foundation. We've built a scaffolding, a structure, a framework that people that are vested in this notion of having a more equitable economy, one that's predicated on, high growth companies and all the excitement and good that they do, that others can engage in that model, and they can plug into that framework and help us with this, because the amount of work that's needed is just exponentially beyond our means to do it alone.
Right.
So we have to find people that are willing, that share our values, that want to engage. We have to figure out a way to leverage that, to welcome them, to the tent. Add some, we'll be kind of the navigator, right? So we kind of keep on a point in a direction, but we have to engage, the broader statewide community towards this common purpose. And then, just like I said before, execute, measure, modify, rinse and repeat.
Yeah. And Thom, we've got some questions coming in. I want to encourage all of our guests to start, raise your hand or go in the Q&A, go in the chat, ask a question. And Nick is going to kind of chime in here and help with the questions in a minute. But the thing that's interesting, Thom, is, you know, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, but you know, one of the things we have in common is this appreciation for the democratization of entrepreneurship. We you know, sort of both see it that way as a means of empowering people, and it's not just about accelerating the ability of, you know, the best and the brightest at the best universities to develop whatever they're going to develop, that it can empower people in a much broader sense. And so when you came to NC IDEA, you're in the middle of the triangle, like you're in the middle of the Silicon Valley of the East Coast. And you made a strategic decision. I'm asking this a question, to not try to compete with that.
No, there's no point of it, right? I've over the years, it's been funny when people ask me about like competition. And my point on that is the need is so great. The opportunity is so vast. You know, if there was something like a competitor NCIDEA, I would welcome them with a bear hug and a kiss on both cheeks, right? Like, we need more people to help. Again, we can only do a fraction of it. We're doing everything we can to address the needs, but you know, we could 3x, 4x our ecosystem partner network tomorrow if I had the funds for it, right? Yeah. And so I would love for a future, you know, where there are so many organizations that are supporting, you know, people in their kind of entrepreneurial ambition, that, you know, we could stop doing certain programs because they're just superfluous, you know, they're not needed anymore. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Right.
So in the meantime, we'll just keep slugging away and we'll do what we can. And I just have to do this admission because we're all good, close friends here, right? I know we don't get it always right. You know, it's subjective. You know, the definitive book on how to do this has yet to be written, although I am about halfway through it. So, you know, you have to, you know, practice what you preach, and we trial, we err, we do better, and then we do it again, right? And the more people that want to join us on that journey, the more welcome that they are to do so. And then just don't be afraid, right? It's a little bit like going against social norms. And Gary, I've loved hearing you over the years lecture about, you know, the positive deviant, I think is the term you use, or is it positive deviance?
Yeah.
Right. Like you're outside the box. And so sometimes I get a little bit slapped on the nose because I make comments about these big, you know, large S packages of benefits to bribe a company. I mean, encourage a company to come here. I'm not anti that, even though sometimes it sounds like I am. All I'm saying is I wish we had a fraction of the same attention span, willingness, and allocation of resources to, you know, invest in the startup ecosystem, which grows organically. And by the way, stays loyal to the geography where it starts.
Right.
It's not until the third generation that they become a flight risk, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
So if you really want to build something that's going to be sustaining, that your grandkids are going to work at someday, then think about supporting, you know, the startup ecosystem today, and then be one of those people that are, you know, blessed for the fact that they can plant a tree knowing they'll never enjoy the shade of it, but future generations will.
Yeah. That's interesting. I want to come back to that, Nick, but I want to pause for a time. Get some.
Let's bring in our participants' voices here a little bit. So I'll start with a comment and a question from George Taylor, Dr. George Taylor. He's talking about kind of the K-12 and higher education settings and the challenge of shifting things towards the entrepreneurial mindset in those spaces. And he says the very nature of the traditional notion of school, that of labor market participation and community engagement, though very important, are static in our current global marketplace, where entrepreneurship, whether that's entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. His question is, what are some of the initiatives or thoughts that the two of you have on ways to integrate and influence public education policy in this area of entrepreneurial mindset?
I think a big part of it, at least, you know, what the battle I'm trying to fight here in the state of North Carolina, and I've seen this in other states where it's happened, is just, it's fighting for attention span of, superintendents and policymakers, the people that have the influence, the juice to make those decisions. The status quo, especially in education, is so entrenched, and the antibodies, right? You come out with something new and that's different. The antibodies just come out after you, and you've got to be strong and being able to take it. Case in point, direct case in point, I can tie right back to Eli and education. Almost 3 years ago now at our summit, a friend of mine who's been a 30-year educator in a public school district got to meet Ted Dintersmith, another kind of friend affiliate of Ice House and Entrepreneurial Mindset. Was so inspired, went back to his school. He had already been studying a lot of the work of Tony Wagner and Ted, and said, okay, I want to do a new curriculum for, I think it was 10th graders, based upon problem-based solving and the scientific methodology that they did in Startup High. Lasted 2 years, and from the union to the school administrators to everybody that came, out with the pitchforks against that.
Fellow teachers.
Here's a 30-something year. He's been voted teacher of the year in that school multiple times, right? I mean, it just shouldn't be that hard to do something that's so obvious. Yet it is. And I wouldn't, Dr. Taylor, I wouldn't presume, I'm sure you're way more versed in that space than I am. So I wouldn't presume to know how to break that cycle. I know I can observe the problem, and I can help demonstrate, the upside in supporting it. Heck, Eli certainly can. I mean, the testimonials, the case studies speak for themselves. But I think what we need is influencers, white knights, and champions that can have whatever lever of influence they can possibly use to make the case for it. And then you just have to get the camel's nose under the tent and then just rush in.
Yeah. So Dr. Taylor, I really appreciate that question. And I have a couple things to say about that. I think the biggest challenge we have right from up front is the way in which we define our ability to embrace entrepreneurship in education is limited by the ways in which we define it. And most people, for good reason, hear the word entrepreneur and they think, oh, that means you're going to they think of it as a business discipline. And I'm not interested in business, it doesn't concern me, so they ignore it. And, I think what I'm saying is that all students need to learn how to think like entrepreneurs in order to adapt and thrive. And I think the transition isn't that difficult. We have to recognize the extent to which other directed, routinized learning that was designed, that's a relic of the industrial era, as Thom said, is designed to prepare people for routinized, other directed labor. And that world no longer exists. And I think the transition is to, start to introduce more self-directed learning to prepare people for self-directed work, and embrace more experiential problem-based learning, self-directed learning, peer-to-peer learning, those kinds. Those are that is entrepreneurial learning. That's kind of my 2 cents there.
Oh, that's good. I'm going to skip ahead because there's a relevant question that just came in. Can we eat the elephant one bite at a time? This is from Gail Larson, introducing entrepreneurial mindset in small pieces. And I like that in the context of how to start shifting the ball in public education at all levels. If you could speak more on that.
I'm a big guy and I have a big appetite, so I'll go after that damn elephant in a big old chunky way. But if we have to take it one bite at a time, I'm up for it. Like whatever it takes, at the risk of being too flip. I don't mean to be, whatever it takes to get it started, because that's the hardest part, right? The one thing that the Eli team and I have as an advantage over people that don't yet understand the value of an entrepreneurial mindset education program is we've seen where it's taken hold. And once it does, you can't go back, right?
Put the genie back
you
in the
can't
bottle,
put it,
right?
the genie's not, you're not shoving that sucker back into the bottle. And so for me, how I lose sleep in the fact that we haven't figured out a big engagement lever yet. And I think I glanced at a question asking about what we're doing. We're offering the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. We've got the ability to make 100,000 licenses free for educators in the state of North Carolina to offer this program. We're trying to make a big push for this because we understand that's what it's going to take for, big change to happen. But that means that can be a lot of little deployments to get started. And then it takes one where you get a break, and then they go, okay, we'll pilot now with 1,000 students.
Yeah.
Right. And then all of a sudden, as educators, that's been one of the funnest things in the early days of Ice House, when we were still kind of beta testing this, and literally Gary and I were flying all over the world, meeting with faculty and people. And then they started sharing their stories like, oh my goodness, the students, how they've come out of their shell, how they've gone from being hardly engaged at all to now being honors students and engaging in their communities, and parents coming in going, what did you do to our child? You turn their life around. That's that virtuous cycle that we got to try to get to. And at least in North Carolina, and apologies to anybody that's not from North Carolina hearing this, at least here, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that as easy as possible for you to do.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to pile on. I agree with Thom. If we've got to do it one bite at a time, so be it. But having said that, I just posted a link in the chat here to a white paper that we published a couple of months ago called the Entrepreneurial Mindset Imperative. And this was inspired by a book written by the former president of Kauffman, Carl Schramm. We wrote a book called the Entrepreneurial Imperative. But there is an imperative here. I think we're crippling the economic future of our children by systematically inhibiting the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And we don't realize that, from the moment a child sets foot in school, it is assumed that that child is going to become an employee, that child is going to work in an established organization where the useful thing has already been determined by someone else, and they will be expected to fulfill a predetermined, often well-defined role. And that worked for some moment in time. We could argue that made sense at a moment in time, but that's not the world we live in. So if we got to do it one bite at a time, we got to do it one bite at a time. But I do see it as an imperative. Entrepreneurial skills are the attitudes and skills are the attitudes and skills the world now demands. And so that's my other side of the coin answer.
And I'll add one more piece to it. I think people often debate what's the most important skill for an entrepreneur, blah blah blah. It's only 1 degree less worse than our entrepreneurs born or bred, because they're all important. But all joking aside, one of the things where that self-empowerment comes from is that the entrepreneurial mindset. You don't even have to go start something, but the entrepreneurial mindset helps with critical thinking. And to me, that is just a foundational block. And right now, when you think about geopolitical circumstances, what's happening in the world, being capable of critical thought is, I would say, a vital life skill right now, because there are many competing forces that are vying for our hearts and minds. And those that are incapable of independent critical thinking are being leveraged, used, and misled right now.
Yep.
I'm not saying you should hold any specific view. I'm just saying you should have a reason and a method that rationalizes the views you hold.
Yeah. Thom, I think I've been thinking about this for a long time. I think the fundamental difference is a shift in the perceived locus of control of the individual. We don't really, this is mindset talk here, but we don't really understand that we have a mindset, and that there's this unconscious adaptive mechanism that's pulling the strings behind the curtain that we're not even aware of, right? And I think we failed to recognize the extent to which we bought into this idea that someone else has figured out what we need to learn and what we need to do in order to be successful in life. And so the underpinnings of that are an external locus of control, a deeply held belief that someone else is going to tell me how to become useful to other humans, and I'll do that thing that they taught me how to do, and then I'll be useful. And then when that useful thing becomes no longer useful, I'm lost. And the entrepreneurial mindset is the subtle underlying difference is that it's up to me to figure out how to make myself useful to other humans. And I think that's the subtle distinction in the belief system that distinguishes the entrepreneur from the non-entrepreneur. When people ask me, well, what exactly is an entrepreneurial mindset, Gary? I sometimes pause, not to be snarky, but you know, I'll say, well, that's an interesting question. What is a non-entrepreneurial mindset? And I'm asking the question as a way to maybe provoke or to evoke your own deeply held beliefs and assumptions that you're clinging to that you may not even be aware that you're clinging to, right?
Yeah, and what's really cool is when they realize that, it's like they just found a superpower.
Exactly. It's the locus of control. When that shifts, once, you know, I've seen it. We've trained thousands of educators, tens of thousands of people have been through the Ice House program. I can see the moment that light bulb comes on.
Right.
And it's that, you know, it's up to me. I can figure out how to make myself useful to other humans. And the more useful I become, the better off I'm going to be. And not just better off in economic terms, but you know, in terms of a more broader, like holistic perspective. So I don't want to go too far off in the weeds there, but Nick, are there other questions you want to address?
Yeah, definitely. Actually relating to what we were just talking about, kind of teasing around the definition of the entrepreneurial mindset. Michael from Ireland is asking, if you believe that, if you agree with our redefinition of entrepreneurship, which is the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And I'll piggyback with that to say, how essential do you see the role of problem solving being a skill for entrepreneurship? You know, going back to that, what's the most important skill?
So the latter is I'll answer first, and that's the easy yes based on what I just said, right? Problem solving, critical thinking, you know, just figuring it out. It's self-resilience, right? Self-reliance, I should say. Those are all very important. And again, those can be taught, those can be nurtured, those can be
developed,
exercised, right? Like
you
get better at it over time. The redefinition of entrepreneurship, that, you know, I would say that that's as good as others. I would probably throw in there, not just to the benefit of others, but to the benefit of yourself. You know, I remember at Kauffman, we had hours long debates trying to redefine that word. That is a son of a pup to really lock down entrepreneur, right? Hard to say, harder to spell. But again, it conveys something, and I don't know that there's a perfect definition for it, but anything that goes.
There is.
There is. Okay.
There is.
Lay it on me.
Here's the perfect definition of entrepreneurship. It's the self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others.
That sounds good.
And it took me 25 years to come up with that, but that's a distinguishing factor. Whether it's a novel idea or a non-novel, who cares? Like,
right.
Howard Schultz built an empire around coffee shops. There's nothing new about a coffee shop.
Right.
But I like it because it gets to the essence of it. It's self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others. It's not other-directed, it's self-directed. That's the fundamental shift. But that definition also enables anyone to embrace it. If you work in an existing organization, you can still empower yourself by figuring out how to make yourself more useful to more people.
Yeah.
That's like, it's near perfect, the definition. The other point that I wanted to make, Thom, on your comment is that, I've been thinking about this thing. I'd like to write a piece about this. The definition of entrepreneurship is woefully inadequate, grossly misleading, and like a century out of date. If you look it up in the dictionary, it says someone who takes a risk in exchange for a profit. And I think to just characterize entrepreneurship as the profit-driven motive is so deeply disturbing and misleading that it's just overlooks so much of the benefits.
To be nice to the good people at Webster or wherever that wrote that probably 50 years ago,
Right.
the world's also a much different place, right? And that to me
Correct.
ties it back to today's theme, and that is, entrepreneurship and education.
Right.
The education system is meant to prepare students for the world they're going into, not the world as it was in their parents' generation.
Right.
Then an entrepreneurial mindset has to be a basic human right, a basic training that everyone needs to be empowered with, because
that's it.
The pace of change is accelerating. It's almost as if there's like a Moore's law being applied to society right now.
Yeah.
And if we don't give people the skill to unlearn and relearn, to adapt, to be self-directed in their ability to learn, right? To be capable of critical thinking.
Yeah.
To think for themselves and interpret what input they take from the outside world, then we do them all a disservice.
Yeah. Yeah. As Nassim Taleb put it differently, Tom, he said the market is smarter than your boss.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. The entrepreneur has, in the entrepreneurial mindset, has less of an expectation of linearity, of certainty, of stability. It's more of a dynamic stability, the understanding that it's always changing and always kind of fluid and moving. And I think that's part of what empowers the entrepreneur. They're thinking more like hunter-gatherers, right?
Right.
We know that the flora and the fauna are always shifting. We don't expect it to be stable.
Well, the market's smarter than your boss. I guarantee you my staff would agree with that statement.
As would mine. Okay, so what other questions do we have, Nick, in the comments?
Yeah, there's some really good ones. Unfortunately, I don't know if we'll have time for all of them because of how great your answers are too, but we'll get to the ones that we can. Oh boy, where did the one?
I think Nick just said I got to be a little more succinct.
It's not just you. So OC is bringing up kind of a comment, Tom, that you made pretty early in your kind of opening remarks about and Gary piled on with that, which is the representation versus visibility question, or visibility versus representation. That is, OC says, I believe that many African Americans and other non-white people that the prevailing stories of successful entrepreneurs do not look anything like what they can relate to. And so the machine is producing exactly what it would produce, entrepreneurship that looks like something that many people of whatever race or ethnic background cannot see for themselves. So it's not just the racial disparity, but it's also a class disparity, right? If I didn't get into Stanford, I'm never going to go anywhere else.
Right.
So his question is, related to how important entrepreneurial mindset is being critical to this. So how do we scale the adoption of entrepreneurial mindset, and how do we do that more quickly in education specifically?
I'm just going to tie a little bit broader in education.
Yep.
Because Gary did ask me at the beginning, kind of like how we came up with the portfolio we have here, and to the heart of OC's question, right? We wanted to be more specific, the George Floyd situation, and me being originally from Cleveland, and Tamir Rice, and just, the countless, tragedies that have happened over the years, just inspired me to say, like, I cannot just sit by and do virtue signaling. We're not going to put a BLM statement on our website. Like, we got to do something. And so my first instinct was like, okay, we're going to do a program, right? We're going to put something together. I actually wanted to kind of take over a program that had been existing here in North Carolina. And immediately I had to kind of check myself and go, okay, it's good that I've got good intentions, but I'm sure I've got blind spots, right? And so that became the motivation. And by the way, my staff, I credit them. They also helped me come to that conclusion as well. That we said, okay, if we really want to serve specifically the African-American entrepreneurial population of North Carolina, we should probably put together a group of the people we seek to serve and let them lead that, right? And this is a shift. It's a power dynamic shift. because, when you hold the money, when you have the money, you have a false sense of wisdom and intelligence, and
Efficacy. Yeah.
you think you're the what. And it was a mind shift that had to happen, a shift in the mindset to say, no, let's put together a council, and in this case, it was 25 people selected from an open application to call we put out. We had nearly 150 people from, the Black entrepreneurial ecosystem of North Carolina raised their hand and said, I'm willing to serve. And then, it was a matter of our board and our staff being okay, understanding what our role was. Our role was specifically to support this effort, right? And by support, I mean, I had to go find the money. So we've put $1 million into it so far, and I'm out actively trying to find more money and more partners that want to join us on this. But the priorities, the decisions, the funding, where it's going to go, how it's going to be applied, that's being decided by a council that represents the population we seek to serve. Because who knows their needs better than we do? Right. So this isn't to say, listen, you want to serve Black causes, you got to be Black to do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, understand what you bring to the table, including your deficits, and figure out a way to cover those blind spots.
Yeah.
And in our case, that manifested in the formation of the council, and then just being okay with giving up power, so to speak, right? Because the allocation of resources to many is the manifestation of power. And what we had to say is we trust this group. That might sound mundane, but that's a big shift in the way foundations operate. Trust me when I say that. And I know what I'm talking about from an experience standpoint. So that's kind of how we're addressing it. We've got great, partners. I see Jose's on the call, Prospera. So we're inching closer and closer to a similar effort for the Hispanic community. And then what'll happen is over time, they'll all converge, right? And it'll become part of the rich fabric that we're building here in North Carolina that will frankly be very replicable in any other state.
Right.
Or country for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that happening, Tom. Your biggest fan. I love what you're doing in that regard. I thought that this work is really making an impact in North Carolina. I hope that it becomes a national model for others to replicate. One of the, and Nick, I want to inject a question here for Tom. Earlier, it ties some ideas together, but I know this isn't your ambition to try to create a national model, but you're bringing something. You're bringing sort of something unique to the table, I think, in this entrepreneurial approach to economic development, which is different from the more traditional, which you refer to as smokestack chasing. And I remember reading a study Kauffman did in Missouri and Kansas that was wound up costing them $400,000 per job. By the time they added up all the tax perks and the benefits that were given away, they spent about $400,000 for every job they created. Smokestack chasing. But smokestack chasing is maybe politically more expedient versus what you're doing is economic gardening, for lack of a better term, but you're planting seeds today that are going to take, what did that company say you started in 2008? Here we are, 2000, that's 13 years later before it's going to really make an impact.
Right.
So do you see that as sort of an undermining factor, the lack of, this takes time?
It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't have an ambition per se to do a national model, but we are building a national model. When you look at the state, we have every, kind of microclimate, if you will. And I mean that in an economic sense, not in the literal climatological sense. We've got poor, rural, we have different flavors of that. We have, affluent, urban, metropolitan areas. We have underserved populations within, affluent areas. We've got the exurbs. I mean, we've got it all here, right? So there's something in the playbook that we're writing that would be teachable elsewhere. But more than anything, I'm trying to, through our actions, our collective actions, and focus on outcomes, is to give more credence to this as a viable activity that should be supported at a much higher level. And who knows, if it did, we could shorten those timetables, right? Who's to say, like, again, if we threw out an economic incentive package worth $200 million to entice an insurance company to bring, 700 jobs here, who's to say if you couldn't take 10% of that, namely, 20 million, and put it into 10, high growth promising startups, that they wouldn't hit certain economic wickets, a quicker turnaround than whatever the payback period on any incentive package might exist. I mean, in most of these cases, they have 20 to 30 years to produce, the required tax base and other benefits that they're on the hook for. So my goodness, if you can be that patient with that much capital,
good point.
Why not use a quarter of the same resources at half the payback schedule and see what'll happen?
Yeah.
Right. And that's just a story that we have to get out there, and then we have to, show examples of it. It's a lot of storytelling that has to happen, and then finding our advocates, our champions, our partners, our friends of the family, as we say, to say, yes, I will help. Where I have influence, I'll use that influence to advance this notion and support these activities, because we need it here, right? And that's going to make everything so much more resilient. I was quoted in a magazine article this morning that just came out, and I said that it would be shorter list to tell you what we don't fund as opposed to what we do fund.
I saw that in Business Insider.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because it goes to resiliency, right? I mean, you go talk to your financial planner, for your retirement account, they don't tell you, put all your money in AT&T, or I don't mean to cast aspersions on any company, right? They don't say put all your eggs in one basket, but when it comes to economic development, a lot of times it's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
But entrepreneurship, I'm always known for good, bad metaphors. So here's my good, bad metaphor. It's the mutt. It's the rescue mutt from the pound.
Yeah.
That has the irony of being some of the healthiest dogs on the street.
Yeah. But to your earlier point, Tom, what if all students were exposed to just the basics of entrepreneurial mindset education, just the basics? What if we had, what if we put a fraction of the effort into sports, into entrepreneurship in middle school or high school that we do to sports? What if we had parents showing up, bundle up on a cold Saturday night to cheer kids on for their startups?
Yeah.
Right? Where would we be 10, 20 years on?
And to be clear, there are schools and programs that do that, like Junior Achievement, right, is one such program.
Right.
But we'd be better off, and this is a little off topic, but I have this thesis that hopefully I'll live long enough to see if I was right or not. But I think the more we can push entrepreneurship education down into the K-12 system, the greater appreciation we'll have for multi-generational families in the country. Because it is one of those things that your parents or even your grandparents, can engage, and you can unlock some of that, that experience.
Mm-hmm.
How many kids are growing up, in particular, the ones that are going to more affluent private schools, right? Those tuitions got to be paid from somebody. In a lot of cases, the mom and dad or the grandparents, started the business. They're incredible entrepreneurs, right? It's something to engage the family on that has the potential to also change culture.
Yeah.
You and I saw this, I don't know how many years ago, right? When we were in the Mississippi Delta trying to get Ice House, promoted. And one of the things we heard from an inertia and a pushback standpoint was the reaction that students were getting when they went back home. Like, wait a minute, what's this language you're using? Why are you being different? In that case, it was unfortunate because it was an apprehension, because it was so foreign, right? But if you can sustain and push through that for some period of time, it starts changing. It's muscle memory. It starts changing.
It's a culture shift. It's exactly what it is. Yeah. What other questions do we have, Nick?
Yeah, so many good comments and questions. I'm trying to sift through the best one to connect the dots where we are. So multiple comments are coming around kind of the concept of lifestyle businesses. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is broad in general. Large companies that eventually sell, they're either absorbed by another company or go public, whatever it may be, and that larger economic impact. But what about the lifestyle businesses? And so an anonymous attendee is asking you, Thom, as you work within the triangle and beyond, how do you address with colleagues the high growth versus lifestyle concept? And they say, a label which can carry an unstated value of judgment, I fear, business development support mission within the NC entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then to piggyback on that, just briefly, where was it? Jonathan is talking about what do you think about state departments incentivizing, supporting that type of business, the lifestyle business, rather than only high growth, focusing on high growth?
So from the anonymous question, it's a great and it's a fair question. We deal with it quite a bit. And matter of fact, I even get a little bit of heat from time to time because we pretty much don't do much for the lifestyle entrepreneur, other than a lot of our programming is available to them. So, whether it's our labs program or our SOAR program for female founders, or Ice House. So, I mean, we make some programming available to everybody. And I would defend and rail against anybody that would think of lifestyle entrepreneurs in a pejorative sense. I can just tell you the rationalization why we don't focus there. It's what was already alluded to, is that the guidance, right or wrong, that we have from the directors through the staff is that we are looking for those larger levers of impact, and most notably job creation, right? And so the more growth oriented firms or the individuals that express that as a desire, they're more competitive in our programs for that reason, right? But there is absolutely nothing wrong with an individual whose company is really their job, right? And that's what all they want to do with their life. That's their right to do that. And I applaud them because, again, in the numbers, right, there's many of them. And so in the numbers collectively, they still have that impact, right? That's still a mortgage getting paid. That is still a tuition that gets paid, right? Or whatever. So I applaud it. I'm just trying to give you the rationalization as to why we don't focus on it. The last point about like resources and state, here's something that at this particular moment in time, this is a historic moment that we're all living through right now. And that is the billions and billions and billions of dollars of federal largesse that's coming through because of the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, and subsequently assuming that they get some sort of infrastructure bill in. So county, city, state coffers are overflowing with resources right now. In the state of North Carolina, from a tax revenue standpoint, we're billions of dollars ahead of budget, right? And so what scares me to death is how much waste there's going to be right now, and wasted opportunity, right? Because if there ever was a time to say, okay, we can fund only so many incentives to, again, encourage and entice companies to move here, and you look around and go, okay, what else needs money, right? I'm scared to death that what'll happen, especially in the more rural communities, it'll be like, well, hey, you know what? The Schwabel hardware store on Main Street, that's been vacant for 30 some years. It's a little bit of an eyesore. Why don't we, spend $1 million to do a historically accurate, restoration?
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that'll be a community event. There'll be a ribbon cutting ceremony, county commissioners and the mayor gets to stand in front of everybody and say, oh, isn't this great? And then it's done. When instead, what's more important than the four walls? What happens in between the four walls?
Right.
And that's the stuff that needs to be funded, right? You need to fund people to offer courses, to do workshops, to help with, business startup challenges.
Thom, what you're saying to me, it sounds like what you're saying is that we can't solve the problems of today with the logic of the past. And that's what the fear is, that we're just going to double down on the logic of the past with these resources.
Exactly.
And it's going to not going to go anywhere. And it reminds me of this line from a book written by, this is an excellent book. I'd recommend anyone. It's called Collapse, like How Societies Choose to Succeed or Fail, by a guy named Jared Diamond, who's best known for Guns, Germs, and Steel. But he said something important, and he pointed out, you know, the values that we cling to in inappropriate conditions are the very same values that were once the source of our greatest triumph. And that's part of what makes societies collapse. And, you know, the other point that he makes in his book, which called Collapse, is he's identified, I think there were 5 factors that why societies like crater, why they fall apart. And one of the commonalities, he said, Tom, was like short-term thinking, like political cycles that, you know, there's no long-term strategy. And that was sort of where I was going with my earlier question about, you know, the things that are politically expedient aren't necessarily what's best for us in the longer.
I would almost say they rarely are.
They're right in any part of life, right? It's just
Right.
like what the quick and easy solution, you know, is almost never the right solution.
You know, and so with this, back to this, you know, federal funding that's coming through right now, you know, and Brookings has been publishing a great series called The Strategy for Left Behind Places. And this is now more specifically to rural. And I just saw Dr. Jonathan Thill's comment, who I know is doing incredible work in a rural community. What I fear is that there's going to become, within rural communities, there's going to become a divide. There's going to be those fortunate enough to have, you know, the Jonathans doing what he's doing with Venture Ashboro, and they're getting creative and they're thinking about, you know, how they can coalesce what critical mass is there and, you know, what's the gap analysis. And then there's just the others that are just like, there's nobody there that's leading that thinking or that effort. And you're just going to see this chasm, right? So there's now the rural and urban divide, but then within rural, you're going to start seeing divides, right? Those that are doing something to stay relevant, to engage, to, you know, keep a energy and a critical mass going and reinvent themselves. And then the ones that are going to be like, there's going to be a sign posted at the border that says last one out, turn the light off. And that's just going to be, you know, a tragedy for a lot of states that don't figure out a way to engage the rural communities. And I can't think again of a better way to do that than through entrepreneurship. For too many of them, you know, it's dependent upon like one big employer. Which, by the way, just got me to remember a point I actually meant to make, and I did a spoiler alert on social media on this. Your community colleges are some of the most underappreciated assets that we have in society and in the economy, in particular in the rural communities.
Yep.
They are such a hub of economic empowerment activity and economic enablement activity that if you've never engaged with your community college, I could not encourage you to do so more.
Yep.
You know, that's, you know, our big universities, and we've got lots of them in the state of North Carolina and lots of them right here, you know, within 10 miles of where I'm sitting. They're great. We're lucky to have them. They're beautiful. They're also walled gardens. They're typically to the benefit and the extent of those fortunate enough to be affiliated in some way. But the community college is truly a community partner, right? They don't compete, generally speaking. They're based upon, and enrollment's based upon basically geography, right? In the state of North Carolina, we have one of the best statewide systems in the country. So there's this organizational level at the top. As a matter of fact, it's currently being run by Thomas Stith, who happens to be a certified Ice House facilitator. I will remind him if he's listening or one of his staff is listening. You know, but they just, it's such a resource and people don't even know about it. Far too many people don't know that.
Yeah.
So, you know, get out into your community, learn the community college that serve your area, and look for ways to engage. I promise you, you'll be happy that you did.
Yeah. And I'm going to pile on that, Tom. I've said this for years. I think the community college is the ideal place where entrepreneurship education should live.
Yeah.
I think it's the ideal, it's the hub of the community, as you're saying. These are like non-traditional students and traditional students. There's so many resources there, so many connections to the community.
Also, so many high school students now that are getting prerequisites knocked out at the community college level. So with,
Yeah.
I think it's called concurrent curriculum, or I don't know the term,
Concurrent credits. Yeah. Yeah. Nick, are there any other questions that we should be addressing? I'm worried that we're not going to get to everyone's comments.
Yeah, no, we've got a couple more general ones, but actually one that just came in. In supporting high growth / job creating businesses, do you encounter a challenge with fiscal support of those early stage / startup companies that do not want to be sold in the future? Do you have problems that provide financial support, programs that provide financial support rather, that can work in that ownership structure?
So just to clarify something, there's no requirement to our funding that a company aspires to be acquired or to sell. We don't presume that as the preferred outcome. It's generally speaking, or oftentimes it is a desired outcome for a lot of people that are involved, but it's not a requisite for our programming. Candidly, I don't care mostly whether or not there's ever an exit, as long as there's an economic engine behind the activity. Right. And so for some, not everybody keeps score with their bank account. For some, it's just the joy of, they're running something that, again, is providing for the livelihoods of many others, and they want to be doing that, for the foreseeable future. And that's okay. Right. A lot of the narrative is, again, co-opted. I'm just as guilty. I said that earlier in this call, about the Spoonflower exit. I only bring that up, though, to make the point that back when we funded it in 2008, it was little more than an idea,
right?
From a potential standpoint.
Right. And
having an organization or an entity that is willing to take that high risk, more than probably about half-ish of our companies over time, close up shop. And if we were batting much higher than that average, I would tell you we're being too safe, right?
Right.
The companies that will eventually reach escape velocity, at least especially in North Carolina, the ecosystem is so vibrant and healthy, they'll find their way to the money fountain, and then they'll go off that path.
Yep.
Our job as a nonprofit that does economic development, that seeks to empower people through entrepreneurship, is to find those long bets. And of the last 5 years, with a particular focus, find those long bets within our underserved populations, and level that playing field and give them the runway so that they can, survive to that point where they're going to be just as competitive, have all the same advantages and access to anything else. And then you can let the free markets and capitalism and whatever other libertarian theory you want to throw out there, you can let those take in there, but we will have done our job to level the playing field and have more people get to that point.
Right. Well, and to piggyback on your comments there, Thom, it bothers me that so many colleges and universities are teaching one flavor of entrepreneurship, which is the Mark Zuckerberg, the venture-backed, or the Shark Tank model. And I look, Shark Tank is reality TV. And it just doesn't, it's not an accurate, whether it's looking at Mark Zuckerberg, the venture-backed high growth model, right, which is a tiny fraction of a single percent of how companies start. It's really highly visible, but not representative, but it just sort of skews our thinking about how to be entrepreneurial and who can be entrepreneurial.
I'm going to pull a Gary here, and I'm going to drop a book reference. And I only have the capacity of a fraction of what you know and have dropped. But one of the books I remember along my journey, and it was, I think, early on in my economic development journey, so not even in my entrepreneurship, the first part of my career, was the Millionaire Next Door.
Yeah.
That book has been recommended a million times.
Yeah.
It's not going to win a Pulitzer Prize for anything, but it really demystifies the power of entrepreneurship, and that there are people that have provided very well for their families and their communities that you've never heard of. They're running companies in dirty little industrial parkways, or, a dry cleaning, business or whatever. But it's just that it's them exercising, frankly, the 8 life lessons that we have in the Ice House program.
Yeah.
Right. Power of choice, persistence, generating wealth. It's all those basics, nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
And again, just grinding it out day in and day out. And, you're going to wake up one day and you're going to have, 7-8 figure net worth. Your kids and family are going to be healthy and well provided for, and you're going to be, contributing. It's going to give you capacity to do things for your community.
It's going to take 20 years though.
Yeah.
It's not the overnight success. And that's the, Thom, and I know we're running out of time here, but you remind me of this quote from Stephen Jay Gould about, I think it was in The Mismeasure of Man. And he said, I care less about the machinations and weight of Einstein's brain than I do of the near certainty that people of equal or greater talent have lived and died in sweatshops and cotton fields. And I think that's really, to me, the essence of entrepreneurship. And I think that's where you and I are kindred spirits.
I would agree.
We see the ability of entrepreneurship to empower ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And I think that's the theme here, right? That's the power of entrepreneurship for economic development. We have to redefine it, and we have to expose all students to it, because and I think you can speak to this, but I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs around the world, and probably a third of them will tell me, I never identified as an entrepreneur. So these aren't people that are even signing up for entrepreneur courses. They don't.
Right.
They are sort of following this trajectory without identifying it. So anyway, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I think that's sort of the theme in the work that you're doing, is empowering ordinary people.
That's what we're trying to. I mean, because as you've heard me say it 1,000 times, right? And I can't remember where the epiphany hit me, but it struck me like a lightning bolt at the time. Our greatest natural resource on the planet is the entrepreneurial potential of people, of all people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. What they can do collectively for society and for humanity, it will far exceed any benefit from any natural resource we can dig up from the ground or harness from the sun or the wind. They will cure all.
Yeah.
If we nurture it, if we support it, if we help them. And that's the value proposition in a nutshell. And it can't be from a homogeneous population. It's got to be from a rich, diverse, multi-connected population. And if we get to that point, things will look pretty good.
Yeah. Thom, we got to leave it there. That's a beautiful ending, closing statement right there. I really, really love that idea. That's our greatest natural resource, is the untapped entrepreneurial potential in our people. Yep. I love that. Thom, is there a way we want to direct people? You can learn more about the work you're doing at ncidea.org. Yep. Any final closing comments?
I'm always happy to hear feedback. If people on this, thought I was full of, bull pucky, feel free to take issue. I am T Ruhe, TRUHE at ncidea.org. Feel free to send me an email. I'm at Thom Ruhe, THOMRUHE on Twitter, whatever. Use the digits, as the kids would say. You can get a hold of me. I'm always welcome to be challenged on our thinking, because I think that's how we evolve and get better.
Yep.
Again, I said it earlier, we don't pretend to have all the answers. All I will commit is you have our whole, heart and soul behind this. Mm. And for as long as the board wants to keep me around, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try to join many others that feel likewise to help us be able to do more and increase our capacity to do more. And in so doing, hopefully we'll be an example for other states to follow and empower more people.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Thom. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate the conversation, all your comments. This is really a robust conversation. Love to continue this conversation with all of you. I hope you guys can join us. We're going to take a pause for the month of July in our Entrepreneurship and Education webinar series. We're going to come back. I think it's on August 11th with Dr. Rebecca Corbin from the National Association of Entrepreneurship. excuse me, I just, from NACE.
Community College Entrepreneurship, National Association of Community College Entrepreneurship, NACE, which is headquartered in the great state of North Carolina now. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you for that assist there, Tom. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at ELI, Entrepreneurial Mindset Education Training, Professional Development, we're at elimindset.com. Hope to see you guys in August on our next webinar. Thanks for joining us. Bye, guys.